coverage than any other television station in New England.
It's difficult to wake up and see 25 years of your life shredded on the front page of the newspaper, to have your integrity questioned, to be asked to resign by your employer where you've worked for 25 years, quite honorably, 3 times a week for 25 years doing a column, and to have that career flushed down the toilet in the space of 12 hours. Yeah, you could say that was difficult.
Hello, I'm Joe Sciacca.
And I'm Arnie Arneson.
You know, unless you've lived in the cave, you've seen the news about Mike Barnacle, the Globe cigar-chomping star columnist who is the recent in a line of embarrassing people who are at the center of an embarrassing situation involving journalists. Mike Barnacle, recapping very quickly, is being questioned for using, or plagiarizing really, some jokes from a George Carlin book in a column that he wrote without any attribution. He says it was an innocent thing, that in fact a friend of his simply gave him the jokes and he hadn't read the book and wasn't aware of it. But of course the Boston Globe is saying that that's not the case. They want him to resign. He isn't involved in a very, very embarrassing standoff with the Boston Globe right now. Met with the publisher of the Globe this morning, Ben Taylor, to discuss what his future is. And it's a very tumultuous and amusing and yet sad at the same time period in journalism, particularly in Boston, with these sorts of cases happening. Arnie, we have some guests to talk about the topic today.
And I'd like to start by saying, just to ensure full and complete disclosure, Joe works for the Boston Herald.
I was hoping that you were going to rat me out.
I had to say that. And I also write a biweekly column for the New Hampshire Weekly of the Boston Globe, just so you know where we're coming from. And I'd like to introduce our 2 guests. We have with us today Joshua Meyrowitz. He is a professor of communication at UNH. Thank you for coming, Josh.
It's a pleasure.
And we also have Andy Gully. He is the managing editor of the Boston Herald. And I'd like to thank you for coming.
You're very welcome.
All right, I'm going to start this conversation out by starting with you, Andrew Gully. So tell me why I should be outraged that Mike Barnacle stole just a few jokes from George Carlin. I mean, why is this something that has caused everyone from Howard Kurtz of the Washington Post to write about it to virtually everyone to be talking about it in America today?
It doesn't matter if you steal a joke, you steal something else. It's still plagiarism. And that's the first question. The second question is, was he truthful to his employer and the viewers who watched Channel 5 and saying where he got it?
Well, Josh, do you agree with Mr. Gully that this is something about truth and the fact that it was maybe perhaps plagiarism because he wasn't being honest both with his readership as well as his editors?
Well, I have a slightly different take on this. I actually think that it's interesting. Why would Mike Barnacle be so outraged that he's being questioned about this? Why would journalists be so uncomfortable about it? And I think that this incident actually reveals one of the dirty secrets of routine journalism. And that is, if you look at Mike Barnacle's excuse, he said, well, I didn't plagiarize it from George Carlin. I plagiarized it from some friends.
Friends who he's never produced, by the way.
And then, you know, they sent it to me. And I think that this reveals a lot of the way that daily journalism operates.
And you know, that's the sad thing, though, Josh, is that all journalists are being sort of painted with a broad brush in light of these sorts of incidents.
Yeah,
I don't think that reporters or columnists in general go out and lift things from other people. I think that, and I also think that, you know, you can certainly say that Mike Barnacle's guilty of journalistic larceny here, or petty theft, I guess. But I mean, to say that Mike Barnacle doesn't have an original thought in his head, or
no,
you know, is absurd.
I mean, I'm not saying that, but I am saying, though, and I'm not painting all journalists with this, but I'm saying that there is a very large percentage of journalism that is invited plagiarism. There's a huge PR industry that feeds stuff to journalists every day, and they want it to be plagiarized. And I know every PR person I know has a whole thick file full of, here's my press release, here's the way it got in the newspaper, often with somebody's byline,
But the
slightly rewritten.
Press releases that roll into the Herald newsroom get thrown away every day.
I'm sure they do, but studies of even Wall Street Journal and other papers have shown that 50% of the news in there at least originated in the idea, if not in the actual words, from press releases. I've been quoted in news stories with bylines of reporters I've never spoken to, and I know exactly how it happened, because universities send out press releases.
Yeah, but this is a different case, though. This is Barnacle claiming that some friend, first one friend and then 2 friends, who we've never heard of and don't know, and he has not produced anybody other than the Globe editors, gave him some jokes that were almost word for word out of a book, and somehow miraculously the friends remembered them so carefully, and he remembered them on his little scraps of napkins that he put them right in the paper.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious.
That's not a press release. That's lifting something.
It's obvious what Andrew would do in this case if he were the editor of the Boston Globe, and that is he would fire Mike Barnicle, I would guess. But what would you do, Josh?
What would you do? That's a great question.
Well, I would be the editor of the Boston Globe, probably.
All right, but that's not fair. That's not fair.
Lightning strike. Although the way things are going, you may be shortly.
Okay, if I were the editor of the Boston Globe,
Yeah, you
if I were the
job
editor,
opening.
if I were the editor of the Boston Globe or of the New York Times or any of these other news organizations, I would not say, we give you all the news that's fit to print. I wouldn't say expect the world. I wouldn't say, as my local paper says, it's not in this paper, it didn't happen. I'd say, here's the staff I have. CBS Evening News, we give you the world. They have no cars. They have no news bureaus.
What would you do with Barnicle? What would you do with Barnicle?
They have no news bureaus in all of Latin America. They have They used to have one news bureau in the center of the country in Chicago, between the Alleghenies and the Rockies. Their only news bureau. They closed it in 1990. I would say where we get the news from. And how much of the news is generated through press conferences, press releases,
but here's a specific situation where Mike Barnicle is representing to the world that this is his work product.
I would
and then
fire
he
him.
denied.
He'd
You would
be
fire
gone.
him.
He'd be
You'd
gone.
fire him.
But I want to put in the. But I would want to have I would want the public to know. I think the public would be horrified if they knew the way news is gathered, and if they understood how much news is generated from official sources, how narrow the debate is, how few news bureaus there are around the world, how poorly staffed the news bureaus that do exist are, and how little the real reporting goes on, even in the news bureaus that are well
But
staffed.
let's look at this as the extreme, though, because you've got George Carlin, who stands up there and says, "Friends gave it to me, and that I never read this book." And then you see him on Channel 5. Mike Barnicle, and he's holding up this book, and clearly there's some sort of relationship between he and the book.
If you're going to steal jokes from somebody, why George Carlin? Why not Jerry Seinfeld or somebody? Let's make it a little more current. Not somebody from the 60s.
The other problem is that Barnicle also recommended a book that he says a chuckle on every page that he didn't read. And I did hundreds of interviews on my book, No Sense of Place, and only a handful of people read, even though they recommended it, read anything beyond the one-page press release that was sent out by the publisher. And I think most people in the country just do not know where this stuff called news comes from.
Andrew, in terms of scrutiny of journalists and columnists, I mean, how far should that go? Is there a need for more of it, do you think, internally at newspapers?
Any good newspapers editing these people. To throw back to the Patricia Smith case, almost a third of the columns that she wrote for the Boston Globe turned out to be bogus in one way or another. That's poor line editing. Somebody along the line, her direct editor, Greg Moore, or whoever it was, should have been looking at those columns and raising questions. You don't need journalism commissions. You don't need big thought police to go after journalists. You need editors who ask tough questions of their reporters and their columnists and say, what's the deal with this? Especially after initial questions have been raised about anybody. You go back and you hammer him. Why is Barnicle in the spotlight? Because he's had problems before. People went after him.
But you know what's really scaring me? Is there a double standard here? Because what we're hearing is that you would fire him. The likelihood is perhaps the Boston Globe is going to fire him. And as of now, we don't know that yet. We know they asked for their resignation. But yet, Channel 5 has stood behind Mark Barnicle, saying, nope, he's going to stay with us and stay with the Chronicle. What does that say about what's the standard here?
We want ratings, we want an audience.
Is the standard for the media, or is the standard for visual
Print
media
versus
here?
TV versus radio.
And what would explain that? Because are you telling me something I see now, I know by definition I shouldn't trust?
Andrew, how much influence do you think the New York Times is going to have here? They own the Boston Globe. I mean, they've been very silent, haven't they, up to this point?
About it's their newsroom, not ours, and I don't really know for sure. But I'd say that we heard that everything that's happened so far has been checked off with New York. I'm sure Matt Storin in Italy is calling New York and running his phone bill up, trying to get a handle on what's going on, explaining what's going on, and also getting permission for whatever action they're having. This is a very tough time for the Boston Globe because of the New York Times influence. As the fall gets on, they're going to play more and more of a role this fall, and this is a very bad timing for Matt Storin.
We're going to take a brief break here and listen to a reader talk about what they think about the Barnicle situation. Come back and talk about Patricia Smith, the infamous Patricia Smith situation at the Boston Globe.
Because I don't equate running a handful of someone else's jokes in the newspaper with apparently what they equated with CNN's story on Americans killing other Americans with nerve gas, or Patricia Smith fictionalizing columns, or the New Republic making up stories. I don't think a handful of jokes, largely out there in eminent domain, floating around, equate with that.
Welcome back to Talk of New England. I'm Arnie Arneson, and Joe Sciacca of the Boston Herald and myself of the Boston Globe are here today to talk about the Barnacle fiasco, if nothing else. And you just heard from Mike Barnacle, who said, I don't want to equate this with Patricia Smith, but in fact, and I'm going to ask you, Andrew Gully, who's one of our guests, he's the managing editor of the Boston Herald, and Joshua Meyrowitz, who's a communication professor at UNH. And I'm going to start with Andy and say, Andy, what choice did the Boston Globe have other than ask for the resignation of Barnacle after what happened with Patricia Smith?
Actually, it's two things. They did have a choice. They
did have a choice.
They suspended him for 1 month for the plagiarism. That's what people have lost in this whole thing. They moved to ask for his resignation when they found out that they believed, apparently, that he wasn't telling the truth when he said he hadn't read the book and didn't have it. When they held up that book on Chronicle, that's when they said, wait a minute, he's not telling us the truth. Then they asked for his resignation. Barnacle has very cleverly obscured that in the clip you just saw, and in all his comments, he keeps saying, they're throwing me out because I stole a few jokes. Well, that's not true. They suspended him for 1 month for lifting those quotes.
You know, it amazes me to see Mike Barnacle in those little snippets that we had, sort of expressing outrage that he's being victimized here by the Globe. I mean, and Patricia Smith had a similar reaction after, you know, it was clear that she had lied and made up people and made up quotes in her columns. I mean, it seems to me that if you're writing a column 2 to 3 times a week and being paid huge money to do it, and you can write about whatever you want to do, it's not exactly heavy lifting to most of our viewers here. Is it just laziness, Josh, or is it something more sinister than that with these people? What's your sense?
Well, again, I think there's a lot of laziness and sloppiness built into the routine structure of journalism. And it's not, I'm not blaming individual journalists. If I were working in many of these institutions, I have to do the same thing. For example, some papers require reporters to file 3 stories a day. Mm-hmm. How much research can you do? So most reporting is not based on any original research. It's not based on looking at documents. It's not based on eyewitnessing of events. Instead, it's making a few calls, what do you got for me today, or getting faxes, or going to a press conference, going to the police to get the crime news.
But don't you think that reporters today are far more adversarial than they used to be? I mean, you can go back to the Kennedy White House when all the press corps was basically sitting there taking the handoffs. It seems like today, though, reporters want to make a name for themselves. They're aggressive.
Well,
they don't listen to the spin quite as much.
But these are also the prima donnas of the reporting business, too. They have a lot of support.
Yeah, you understand there's a game going on here. Sam Donaldson stands up and he says an obnoxious question to the president, so he shows how adversarial he is.
I'm tough.
The president stands up to Sam's great harshness, and he shows how tough he is. And meanwhile, Sam doesn't go to the library to find out what the president said about this before, or what are the real issues. You have this in the Gulf War. All the journalists are saying, you're not letting me to the battlefield. You're not letting me to the battlefield. I want to see blood. I want to see guts. I want to win my Pulitzer. And they all go to quietly then to the press, the pool coverage. And nobody goes to the library to look at the role of the U.S. in that region, to look at the history of U.S. involvement there, the overthrow of governments.
But this is a situation where, unfortunately, he did go to the library. The problem is he didn't give credit to the librarian. I mean, that's the problem here.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that there's a sloppiness and laziness built into the demands of journalists. The New York Times, which has one of the best staff.
I just feel that Barnacle has all the luxury in the world to go wherever he wants. He picks up a phone and drops his name. People come to the phone. He goes to a crime scene. People talk to him. There's no reason to sit on his butt in the Globe newsroom and lift jokes.
That's not real research.
Sloppiness and laziness is not an excuse for taking someone else's work. I mean, you can still be sloppy and you can still be lazy, but you don't lift
101. It's journalism, which is why we're also astounded in journalism what's happening over at the Globe. And again, I have to say that I am from the Herald, but I can keep some objectivity here. I think as a reader of the Boston Globe, and say that it's just amazing that that this is even happening. I mean, that every journalism student knows the basic rules are: you don't lie, you don't make stuff up, you don't. It seems unconscionable.
I'm very comfortable with the firing of Patricia Smith and of Mike Barnacle. What I'm not so comfortable with is how comfortable the other journalists are with, now that we've gotten rid of these bad apples, that everything is fresh in the rest of the barrel.
I don't think that's the case. See, I think what's happening is because of these bad apples, and they're notorious because everyone knows who they are, I think all the other journalists are feeling less comfortable because I think now they're saying, what do they think about my work? I mean, the first thing I got was a call from one of my editors going, so tell me about your stories. I mean, everyone is now saying, because it's cast a much broader brush on everyone that writes.
But the real problem is where nobody complains, and that is Kenneth Starr has a secret backgrounder news conference with journalists. The rules of the backgrounder are you can say what was said but not mention who said it or that there was even a press conference. And then Peter Jennings comes on and says, ABC News has learned, as if they've actually done some research. You flip the station, and NBC News is saying, NBC News has learned, and CBS News has learned, and all these have learned. Where have they learned it from? And the problem is that the American public doesn't know very much about its country. It doesn't know much about the world. It doesn't know much about what its government does in the world. It's fed lies by people.
But the American people know what
Springer.
they like, and I think you have some interesting stuff, Andy, about Staples, for example, because didn't Staples just send out some sort of a memo
They
to
sent
the
a
Boston
fax to the
Globe?
Globe this
Listen to
afternoon in the
this.
last hour or so. Tom Stenberg, the CEO and honcho there, directly saying that without Barnacle, the editorial content of the Globe is not as attractive an ad vehicle. It's definitely a heavyweight implied threat. The Globe has been bombarded with calls saying, we don't like this decision. We
This
want
has
Barnacle
happened.
back.
When the San Jose Mercury News ran an article about how to get the best price on cars, there was a boycott of all the car dealers.
But you know, there is, I mean, Andrew, isn't it the case that the readers are the ones you can't fool? They're out there reading this stuff, and they know.
No, you can't fool the readers.
Well, no, I don't think so.
You can fool the readers. You can tell them that
you know what, I think the
Iraqi
readers, I think
soldiers
readers are a lot
took Kuwaiti
smarter than
babies
that.
off
I think
incubators.
readers are a lot
We gotta go to
smarter than
war.
that. When I get calls all the time when I write a column for the Herald or when my reporters is doing something. People out there will pick out the nuances of a story. They are smart people. Readers read the paper very closely. You can't pull the wool over their eyes, and you can't break that trust. And that's what the problem with
Here's my
Barnacle and
question.
Smith is.
My question is, what is Staples saying, however, by saying if you decide to fire Barnacle, we're pulling? We now know that Barnacle definitely didn't write those lines. We know that those lines come from Carlin. We know that he at least claimed he never read a book he at least held in his hand and never saw the book that he held in his hand. What is Staples saying about the credibility of the Boston Globe, that they should keep this guy in order to keep that account? What's going on here with that
again,
sort of financial influence?
If you read Gloria Steinem's first non-advertised issue of Ms., she has a piece called Sex, Lies, and Advertising, and details with naming names how every company requires compatible editorial in its in the magazines.
Scary part.
And magazines, and I actually have the calendars with me. I can show you. They give out to PR and advertising firms their feature stories for the year ahead of time, so that they can get the press releases and the compatible advertising ahead of time.
Andrew, what about those pressures?
Andrew's
The pressures between
right, 'cause he's a
advertising
managing
and you know, what is the journalistic content of a newspaper?
I can honestly
Where's the
say we
line
don't-
drawn there?
We don't feel those at all, honestly. I mean, we make our decisions every single day in news meetings with editors who have no contact with any
Well,
kind
this is what
anybody in
you
the ad
always hear
department.
from our colleagues in the press, and yet you see an amazing pattern of what's not in the news.
When's the last time you were in a news meeting? I mean, that doesn't happen. That does not occur.
There's very little direct influence because most people know what's not appropriate to do.
So you're saying reporters will pull back because they know that an advertiser is working for the newspaper or for...
Well, it's a subtle thing. For example, if you look in the Boston Globe auto section, there are good reviews of some cars and bad reviews of other cars. So it's honest, it's objective, it's neutral. But there are never any negative stories about cars in general, the pollution they contribute.
That's not true.
about-
When they've had
not true.
recalls of SUVs, all those stories make the paper
No,
all the time.
about general, in other words, that cars are a problem. In other words, the basic issue is not really discussed, about that we shouldn't be buying as many
Well, you know what
cars.
I want to do?
That's a little
I want
pie
to
in
call.
the sky.
See, what I want to do is I want to
it's-
call Staples, and I want to ask Staples why they sent that fax to the Boston Globe. That's what I want to know.
Staples is-
I want to know what message are they sending? Frankly,
They're one of
to
hundreds
their-
of examples of this, though. You read Columbia Journalism Review. These are journalists themselves reporting example after example. Chrysler Corporation asked they wanted advance copies of magazines to see if the articles were compatible. That led to a big embarrassment because they were explicitly asking people to sign contracts that they would not have, that they would allow them to see the copy ahead of time. And they rightly said no, journalists said rightly, no way. But secretly, as was written in the Columbia Journalism Review about this, everybody knows sort of the things you don't.
No, you know things that
Right.
are delicate. Obviously, the newspapers are a business like anything else. A few years ago, we ran a series of embarrassing stories about a major advertiser, a retailer who was having problems with looking into dressing rooms while people are changing. We went to town on them over and over and over, and we hit them endlessly. The publisher obviously was not comfortable with it. He said, his only question was, make sure you're fair, make sure you're on the line, and you tell these people.
You spend some capital when you do that, and it's great that you did that, and there are examples of that. But there are many, many more examples. Again, you read Columbia Journalism Review and other watchdog publications, example after example of staying away from stories. The woman doing the
I think
sweatshop
that
story
case
about Nike, and then being told not to do the story again at CBS, I think. And then she's outraged that the CBS people themselves, or I forget which network, I think it was CBS, wearing Nike sweatshirts.
Maybe you're talking about smaller publications where there's no competition.
No, actually,
but I think
the LA Times.
when
the LA
I know, when you're
Times
talking about the
basically
Boston
said,
media,
we're going to set up special units to have better connection.
when you're
between
talking about the Boston
advertisers.
media market, the level of competition between the two papers, I mean, if the Boston Globe protects an advertiser, then the Boston Herald would do that story. I mean, it's the competition is just there.
So
and
it's in their
just,
best interest not to.
Well, that's good.
There's going to be a lot of...
You have to realize that most cities in the country no longer have head-to-head
Well,
competition.
and here's the great
Boston
news.
Globe is now owned by the New York Times, and there are fewer and fewer owners
But
that own
Josh,
more and more of the media.
What you're finding out, though, is that competition is actually critical for the media. That's what you're
Absolutely.
finding out, because the Boston
Absolutely.
Herald is keeping the Boston Globe honest and vice versa.
We're gonna take
And
a-
that's
we're gonna-
ultimately
We're going to take a break and come back with a little bit more of Mike Barnicle attempting to explain himself out of a very embarrassing situation here on Talk of New
I
England.
think he can do it.
It's obvious the trouble we're in. When your father pulls up.
I am incredibly resentful to see the editor of my paper, on the front page of my paper, say that I have violated the trust of my readers. I have never done that.
Welcome back. You're watching Talk of New England. I'm Arnie Arneson. We're obviously talking about the Barnicle affair, and we're talking this afternoon with Andrew Gully. He's the managing editor of the Boston Herald, and we also have in studio Josh Meyrowitz. He's a professor of communication at UNH. And I'll start with you, Andrew, and that is that my understanding is that the Boston Globe met with Mr. Barnicle this morning at 10 a.m., and that it is now hours later, and still it appears that nothing has happened. They're delaying and apparently denying some sort of responsibility or closure on this issue. What's going on, do you think?
After the meeting, they put out a statement saying that there would be no comment. Unfortunately for them, that prolongs the misery, and this will drag on until they decide to announce in the paper probably what has happened. From what we've heard, there's people in the newsroom getting their news from broadcasts like this and watching what's going on. It's a siege mentality over there, and understandably, but what it seems to do is drag the whole problem out longer and longer. And again, it sounds very partisan to say this, but it certainly raises questions about who's calling the shots and what's going on. If your editor's out of the country and your publisher is meeting with your star columnist who won't quit, and it drags on for days and days, and he goes on to the Today Show and Imus and everywhere else, he's killing you.
Should Matt Storin, the editor of the Boston Globe, be held accountable for this, do you think?
I think he is, no matter what.
Josh,
He's a very
what's your-
tough
I mean,
competitor, but he's on the hot seat.
Is it possible that Matt Storin just didn't know about this, and now after the fact, I mean, should his head roll or not?
Well, again, I think that we need to look at the larger institutional constraints here, and I like I wish the public knew more about the way journalism operates. I wish the Storin and the other editors would be more honest with the public about the way news operates, and then you can only do so much, and institutions operate under a lot of constraints of time and money and resources and
So you see Mike
advertiser pressure.
Barnicle as sort of a victim of a larger corrupt system?
Yes.
Well, I don't think it's a
minute, wait.
lot.
That's amazing.
Wait.
That's amazing.
See, I don't think it's
Barnicle is not a victim of a large system. He's a victim of arrogance and laziness, not
I was
any
expecting
system.
a yes there.
Well, I would say he's a victim. He has acted more sloppily and more lazily than many others.
There's also a new
but
pressure.
Again, there is enormous amount of pressure on journalists to take shortcuts.
Why? And the reason why there's more pressure is because now there's instant gratification. That means that whether it's the internet, whether it's the TV, whether it's the radio cameras, we saw a picture today of the Monica Lewinsky right outside. There was like thousands of satellites out there because everyone from the Germans to the Japanese were outside waiting. So it's instant gratification. How do you check when you know someone's getting that story out within seconds of it happening? How do you fact check? How do you verify? And then you have this columnist who's writing this light piece, and
you hold your fire, Arnie. You just hold your fire. You don't put stuff out there until you're sure it's accurate and true.
That would be good, but nobody does that. Come on, Joe.
I think. Well, you know what? If you make a mistake, like the Dallas Morning News did during the whole Lewinsky thing, then you're going to pay for it big time. So I think you got to take those extra few minutes to check that stuff out.
The flip side of this is that really the 700 reporters outside focusing on Monica Lewinsky. Where are the reporters in Africa that can explain the context of these bombings? Most of the major news organizations have no news bureaus in Africa. They cover the whole continent with a correspondent. Even the New York Times, which has more than most others, has only 4 news bureaus, including Cairo, which they count as Africa, which is covered by 1 couple. Then I think they have 3 people covering the rest of a continent with almost 800 million people. No news bureaus in all of Latin America. It means that the press and the public is susceptible to manipulation and lies as they were about Nicaragua and El Salvador. We just don't know anything about our own history.
When news breaks, because of the instant sort of gratification, you see this stuff unfolding on CNN, and so the whole world watches news as it breaks. You don't have to rely so much on reporters to run back from the field and grab a phone and phone it in. You're seeing it happen.
That's an event. We watched the Gulf War live. We saw a girl testify before the war about Iraqi soldiers pulling Kuwaiti babies off incubators. Lots and lots of coverage of that.
Lots of
very,
coverage.
very little coverage of the fact that that was a phony story concocted by Hill and Knowlton Public Relations, CEO Craig Fuller, former chief of staff to George Bush, and that was designed to convince the public to go into the war. Very few corrections about that have ever come out. We haven't had major corrections about the Gulf.
I don't just buy the fact that there's some huge media conspiracy out there to take. I mean, Josh,
it's not a conspiracy. It doesn't need to be a conspiracy.
If that's what you think readers need to know about how news is done, I just don't.
If my students are watching this, they'll laugh because I say every time we do institutional analysis of what are the limits and constraints, journalists say, "Well, you're saying there's a conspiracy," and obviously we don't get together in the back room with advertisers with each other to conspire. Therefore, this critique is invalid.
You're saying it's the rule rather than the
Just look
exception.
at what's not. If you read history, and you look at what we were told and what we now know, the track record is not so great.
No, that's absolutely correct. That you don't have the resources to be every place. You don't have the time luxuries to do everything you want. Things are done as rapidly as they can. The old cliche about it's today, it's instant news, instant history today. It's no pretensions. Most people don't think that today's edition of the Boston Herald or the New York Times or any place else is the definitive story. It's the best we can do with the time constraints, with the staffing we've got at the time. And I think most people inherently know that.
But I don't see that as leading to sloppiness. I think what leads to sloppiness is laziness, as in Mike Barnicle and Patricia Smith's case. And I think that the fact that there's more pressure on journalists to report things quickly, instantly, puts more pressure on them to make sure that they're right.
But you know
Make sure that they're right.
There is one time you don't report things right away, and that's with news embargo. The New England Journal of Medicine sends out advance copies, but you're not supposed to publish it till a given day. And if you do it even a day early,
I don't believe in news embargoes. And as far as my reporters are concerned, we don't do it. I mean,
here's what's going to make me a little more frightened, though. Again, I want to go back to Channel 5's decision to keep Mike, and what may still be that the Boston Globe will fire Mike Barnicle. And that is that unfortunately less and less people read, you guys, and more people get their news from what? From the TV set.
Hey, where do the TVs get their news? They get it from us. Where's the radio? Where do the radios get their news? They're ripping and reading. Your radio station is ripping and reading the Boston Herald and the Boston Globe every day.
But here's my point. But here's my concern.
Let's change seats now.
If we're around long enough, we'll agree, Josh. We'll agree.
Yeah, if we had more time to really get this out, I think we'd actually agree on a lot of things.
My concern, however, is that why does the standard seem to me lower on TV, i.e. their decision to keep Mike Barnicle, and the standards seem higher in print journalism. Now that concerns me because if most people are getting their news and information off of what they see because they assume that they trust it, and that standard is lower, that sends a chilling message to everyone out there.
Well, Chronicle is not a news program per se. It's not a news broadcast. Maybe they look at it, you'd have to ask.
Oh, they're saying this is entertainment, so it doesn't matter whether it's fictional or not.
Television shifts our attention from what I call resume criteria to dating criteria.
Yeah, are you attractive?
Yeah, just as you don't choose a lover or a friend based on a writing sample or a resume, it wasn't until television that you consider somebody a viable presidential candidate because of the twinkle in his eye.
See, Joe Sciacca and I are fill-ins.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's right.
So I mean, you do so well because you're so cute.
Yeah, right. Thanks. There we go. But again, that's where the standard begins to get really hazy.
Oh,
and as we see us become more
in every realm of life, though, in journalism, in politics, and in Supreme Court justices, instead of saying what did Clarence Thomas write, what did he say? He says, how he looked, his sense of humor, his wife. But
Andy, I want to ask you a question. Yeah. What does Mike Barnicle do after this? I mean, Mike Barnicle, the reason why he became so famous was not because of his TV stuff, it was because of his writing stuff.
This is
what
America.
Does he do?
There's always redemption. I mean, everybody's forgiven. He'll show up again someplace. He may show up in the pages of the Boston Globe before this is over. He'll be back. He's already on national television programs. He's on the Today Show today. He's on Imus. The man has tremendous clout. He has, a lot of talent. He's not going to go away.
Right. Maybe hosting this show at some point. Who knows? It's possible.
That's right.
He could be a talk radio host in the morning in Boston.
We have to take a break and appreciate both you guys joining us.
Thanks.
And we're going to move on and talk about some other topics later on. But thanks very much.
All right.